Talk to you about something else real quick for about 5 or 10 seconds with Jamie here. This is Jamie Voss. Jamie's a business partner and friend of mine. He's head of security solutions here in Bellingham. And one of the things I wanted to tell all the attendees, you've seen this in some of the material, but just so you know, as part of this summit, one of the things that Jamie and I have offered, I run Ovation Technical Services. We do the IT side. Jamie does more of the physical side and the video monitoring and things like that. We're offering a free audit to any businesses that want to take advantage of that. And basically, if you look in your handout, you'll see a page that describes what that audit includes. There'll be a full assessment of both the IT side and the physical security side. And as a result of that, you'll get an output report that shows at executive level the things that we found and actions that need to be taken by your organization to address the critical factors. So that's something we've decided to try in general, and we think this would be a good place for you guys to start with in terms of an action plan. So if you want to take advantage of that, we're really trying to make it companies more than, so it's not a home-oriented thing, just so you know. But you know, if you have a company that needs to have that kind of assessment done for you, we're not there to fix them. We're there to at least help you identify the problems. Then please take advantage of that, and Jamie's team and mine will be out there to do it, and we'll just have to get it scheduled. There's going to be a box outside the room out here. If you're interested, I think Meg has labeled it. You can just drop a card in there, and then we'll follow up with you after the conference. Okay? And I'm going to turn it over to Jamie here, who's going to introduce Bill.
Thanks. I get the pleasure of introducing our next speaker, partly because I get to work with the fire department hand in hand. And Bill has over 30 years serving our community in the fire department, with almost every position being served, eventually being appointed to the fire chief of Bellingham, where he served for 9 years. And then he decided to retire, and he went to work as the head safety guy for Coastal Industrial Services, which serves, what, how many states? 3, 4, 5 states? 5 states, and he oversees all of their safety. And then also with that, he became a sought-after speaker in crisis communication, and he works with Agincourt strategies, and he's spoken all over the United States doing that in crisis communication. So we're really excited to have him, and it was one of the fun things as we were talking last night. I asked him, what's your biggest accomplishment with that many years in the fire department? And I found this absolutely fascinating. In his tenure as fire chief, there were no fatalities and no injuries on the fire staff. So with that, turn it over to Bill.
Thank you. Thank you, Jamie. If you got your program earlier, you may have read that I was supposed to be tag teaming this with Gerald Barron. But Gerald's down in California, and he saw the weather forecast for the week and went, I'm not coming. So I have to carry the torch. As Jamie mentioned, I have a side gig. I work with Agincourt Strategies, and it's a company Gerald started. And we've done some consulting work actually with New York City, and we've given presentations, and in fact Gerald and I are giving a similar presentation to this, only about 3 hours longer, here next week. So how many in here have a personal Facebook account? Raise your hand. Okay. How about a Twitter account? How about a YouTube account? A little bit less hands. How about Instagram? Okay. How about Whisper? How about Fire Chat? Yeah, a couple people actually. That's just surprising me. So I'm here today to talk to you about speed. Speed in crisis communications. And you guys have spent the whole morning talking about firewalls and putting out digital brush fires. And I know a little bit of something about putting out brush fires. And cyber risk as it relates to what, and actually I didn't understand anything that kid was talking about, okay? I don't have a clue. But I do know about the cyber risk related to crisis communications and how the mobile landscape, the landscape of crisis communications has changed with the introduction of mobile technology. And so we're going to spend some time talking about that over the next 45 minutes or so. So our goal is to talk about the history of technology and the change, and more specifically around mobile technologies, talking about the new expectations related to that now. How do people communicate? What do they do in crisis related to expressing what they're seeing and smelling, hearing, experiencing? How that impacts businesses and agencies, public agencies in particular. Talk about some recent examples and just some things to think about going forward. And as I mentioned, this is really about a 4-hour canned presentation. I'm condensing it down just to splash you with some of the things you need to consider and the new dynamic. This is my Twitter handle. So if you're on Twitter and either like or don't like something I've said, feel free to mention it on Twitter today. I don't take offense to anybody that's using their smartphones and their cell phones during presentations, because that's how everybody works these days. And then I also have a blog where I blog about emergency response. More recently, I've been addressing the Ebola situation and crisis communications, or lack thereof, and preparedness issues related to Ebola and healthcare, and fire response and crisis communications. And this is for Robin's benefit. I'm a proud Western alum, and now I'm a corporate safety director, so I take care of situations like this where people do really dumb things. Real briefly, back in, we'll call it 0G, back in the 1940s, early 50s, radio technology took off, the radio telephone concept started. So fast forward all the way to today, and this is what everybody's doing. Everybody has a smartphone. We got rid of the brick phones. And in about 2009, when 4G technology took off and the infrastructure was built for 4G technology and the introduction of smartphones, that was a real game changer about not only how we communicate, but how we work. Because the productivity dramatically increased. People started building companies started building apps, starting making that telephone much more functional and integrative than in the past. And this is what we're seeing today. Back in 2010, I think it was, but fire department, I was on the fire department at the time. You may remember the old Paces buildings downtown on Hawley Street. 3 of those buildings went up at about 2 o'clock in the morning, fully involved. It was really cool looking. And I'm a fire chief, right? We like fire. So I'm driving to this call, it's 2 o'clock in the morning, and I could tell it was a big fire. It was defensive. There was nothing we were going to do. We weren't sending anybody inside. Very spectacular when I pulled up. I had my phone out. I wasn't driving with it, but when I got there, I pulled my phone out and looked at it, and there was people tweeting about what was going on with that fire. And I thought to myself, who is tweeting at 2 o'clock in the morning? Well, duh. I get out of my car, put my gear on, walk down the street, and there's about 150 college kids. Well, the bars had let out, okay? Everybody was there, and they were all speculating about what was going on. Well, at about that same period of time, TV stations down in the Seattle area, the news media outlets, they monitor all that kinds of stuff, right? I started getting tweets. What's going on? You got a big fire in Bellingham? Yes, I do. From before I even got to the command post, I was already tweeting back to those Seattle news stations about what was going on with the incident, of what I knew based on my radio conversations. And that was before I even got to the command post. 129 million smartphone users. That's a huge amount. This is today's news reporters. This picture was actually taken in an active shooter situation. Unfortunately, we all have too much experience with that recently, very close to home. This picture was taken in a college, I believe University in Texas. And this is how everybody is communicating in crisis today. And I'll tell you why in a little bit. Facebook, 1.1, I think it's 1.19 million users now on Facebook. 100 hours of video every minute uploaded to YouTube. And Twitter has 500 million active users. And actually, I think that number's wrong. I think it's 280 million active users. There's 500 million accounts. So what happens? What has the impact been of that, right? Well, number one, people, forget what they're doing. They tend not to focus on where they're going, and they walk into things. But it's changed our work habits, right? I mean, a lot of you probably could do, and actually, where's Pat Lord? Is Pat here? I was impressed back in the day to watch Pat. He could run his servers off his mobile phone and do things like that. That blew me away. That was one of my aha epiphany moments. And I wanted him to put that software on my phone when I worked for the city. He wouldn't do it. There's an expectation of constant connection. We all go through withdrawals when we don't have a cell signal, right? I went over to Ireland, and I wasn't going to pay the global data fees. The first thing I did when I walked into restaurants wasn't if you had, you have an opening for us, hey, do you have free Wi-Fi? Can I get the Wi-Fi password? Because I had a need to be connected. Here's the biggest thing, and this impacts you in business or a government agency, especially if you have a high-profile event. Those people on the street have the ability to instantly record and disseminate what they're seeing, hearing around the world in seconds. How many saw the missile blow up the other day? SpaceX, whoever it was, had a really bad day. How many saw the 17 or 18 other video views of that explosion? Not the NASA channel, but all the views, the YouTube videos taken from people all around the area, the region, from various angles, including an airplane flying at 3,000 feet. All of those videos were posted within about an hour after that thing blew up. So, when something really bad happens, here's what goes on. People turn to their trusted sources, number one, to share what they're seeing. If you're uncomfortable in a crisis situation, you have a need to not be alone, right? Because it's scary. You want to talk to somebody about it. You want to share that experience with somebody. And part of the reason you're doing that is to say, am I really seeing what I'm seeing? Is this really happening? So you call your relatives, you call your husband, your wife, your boyfriend, your girlfriend, your grandma, and just say, guess what I'm seeing? Guess what just happened to me? All right? So the more visible the event, the higher profile the event is, the faster that's going to happen. And when that does happen, it cripples networks. This tweet right here is from Marcus Darian. He works for the health department. He was my public information officer on the Northwest Incident Management team. And he happened to be down at Mount Vernon watching a baseball game or a basketball game when the bridge collapsed, when that truck hit the bridge and knocked it over. And he quickly got recruited to be the PIO for that incident for the Mount Vernon Fire Department and the State Department of Transportation. Within 20 minutes, the cell network dropped in the Mount Vernon area. So news organizations were reaching out to him to try to call him, and they couldn't get through, and he couldn't get out. He was able to use SMS messaging, however, and get to his Twitter feed and tweet this out, and just gave everybody a heads up. But that's how fast it happens, okay? It's almost instantaneous, within seconds. Another picture from this is a lockdown situation at the college, and again, everybody except the old Grateful Dead guy here has a cell phone in their hand. So, I asked the question, can you be faster than these folks? Is CNN faster than these folks? Fox News? No. And in fact, that's why you constantly hear on breaking news stories, the news reporters saying it right out loud. Hey, tweet us your pictures. Tweet us, let us know what's going on. The public is now the eyes and ears of the news organizations. And in some ways, that's good. But news organizations learned very quickly, especially during the marathon bombing situation in Boston, they were repeating bad information, right? They were repeating information they were getting off of Twitter that was not correct. Fortunately, the Boston Police Department, extremely aggressive in the use of social media in crisis. They were monitoring all those channels and were able to very quickly discount and correct misinformation that's going on out there. So I ask you, business owners and agency leads, are you monitoring your social media channels? Do you have tools in place to say, that look for your company's name or your CEO's name or whatever, and just taking a look at what people are saying about your company, especially if something bad has happened? Just a question. A couple examples of the reality of how this works these days. Back in 2010, I have a, as I just mentioned, I have a Twitter monitoring program. It was TweetDeck at the time. And I was monitoring for the word fire and firefighting. Well, all of a sudden, it kept popping up. All these messages kept popping up about a plane crash outside of San Francisco Airport at San Bruno. So I started, I sit in my computer and I started watching it and listen to what people were saying. And one of the tweets included a link to the local TV station, a live feed, and was from some traffic camera off in the distance. So that feed pops up. And I see this fireball, which is actually probably about 6 times bigger than what this was. This is actually when the fire is actually starting to die down. That was going up about 300 feet in the air and extremely high pressure. Well, I lived through the pipeline explosion in Bellingham on June 10th, 1999. I know what a hydrocarbon, petrochemical, and a natural gas fire looks like. Within seconds, I realized this is not a plane crash. This is some kind of natural gas, petroleum, clean burning fuel, high pressure fire. I tweeted that information out. From my view in the cheap seats, this is some high-pressure gas line fire. Within 30 seconds to a minute, reporters from news stations in San Francisco, actually across the United States, were repeating that tweet and actually sending me direct messages asking me why I was saying that. Other first responders on Twitter monitoring the same situation said the same thing. Within 10 minutes, the news organizations in San Francisco on the live feeds were talking about, wait a second, we're getting information, this may be something else, and we can't get confirmation from the FAA at San Francisco Airport. They're saying no crash. This is perhaps something else. I can tell you the first responders didn't even have that information. That's how powerful social media can be in dealing with crisis, especially in gaining situational awareness. This is Craig Fugate. He's the director of FEMA. He was doing the same thing. And this is what he said in an after-action report. I won't read it verbatim, but this was the first tweet that came out of that experience. A guy by the name of Hector. Nephew. Couldn't find his aunt. Here's another good one. For example, how fast things happen. This is actually as it happened. This poor guy, the neighbor of Osama bin Laden, in Pakistan. He had no clue what he was doing. These are the live tweets. These are the tweets occurring at the time the raid was taking place. He was tweeting about the raid and didn't even know what he was doing. Starts at the bottom. Helicopter hovering above Islamabad is a rare event. Yeah, no kidding. Go away, helicopter, before I take out my swatter. Huge window shaking bang here. I hope it's not the start of something nasty. Well, no, it was the end of something nasty, right? So this guy's Twitter feed blew up. He went from like 200 followers to 20,000 followers within 24 hours, was doing news interviews all around the world. Very briefly, one of the things when I was first learning how to do this and figuring out the Twitter monitoring tools, if you really want to get good at monitoring breaking situations in a crisis, is follow a tornado. Tornadoes, they happen fast, they tend to have regional impact, and they move from point A to point B. And so I got to where I was monitoring these things in the spring, because that's typically when they happen in the Midwest, and you go to the weather forecast and you can figure out what's going on. So I was tweeting about a tornado that was going through Henryville, Indiana, and it was massive. Pictures posted of people coming up out of their basements with their iPhones, taking video and showing pictures of their entire neighborhood gone. They were down in their basements. So I was retweeting that information, and somebody reached out to me, because I'm at Chief B2, and asked me to retweet this. And they also sent it to another person too. And so they were using this tool as a way to get help and to find people. And if anybody that's got Facebook knows that Facebook and Google have put tools in place for crisis now to help people, family members, find each other during a crisis. So social media is really helping out in that regard. And then there's the Asiana Airlines plane crash from last year. What's remarkable about this picture is not that the plane is crashed and that it's burning, is the picture was taken as the person got off the plane, right after they got off the plane, right? Here's another good one. This was the first tweet from the plane crash taken from a passenger getting ready to get on another flight. And this was taken 15 seconds or within 30 seconds after the plane had crashed. That's the dust of the plane sliding across the ground there. And then the plane's here in the background. Now, moving on with that, so how did the San Francisco airport, the Port of San Francisco, react? Well, they sent out a bunch of, started right away with a bunch of tweets. Accident has occurred to SFO. Flight 214 inbound. Rescue efforts underway. Very quick, down and dirty, right? All flights currently suspended. We're going to do a press conference, yada, yada, yada. On the other hand, Asiana Airlines for 6 hours didn't do anything. There's their stock price, 6% drop within about 3 hours. They got killed on Facebook, their Facebook page, absolutely lambasted in social media channels because they didn't put out any information. Now, why that is, I don't know. May have been a cultural thing, just an organizational thing, I'm not sure. But it had an impact. Well, the plane crash had an impact too, but not communicating in crisis does not help your cause with keeping your credibility and your reputation up. LAX, similar situation. They had an active shooter, a TSA agent, was shot and killed by some weirdo. And LAX, this is their Twitter feed. Here's a feed, just a regular old tweet, no big deal. Uh-oh. Incident underway at LAX. Law enforcement on scene, more information to follow. Confirmed police incident began 9:30, so they start reporting this on Twitter. They're not doing a press conference. They're not writing a press release. They're on a fast-moving incident in a Twitter channel, and they're starting to talk. And here's some more tweets. They just kept going. They got the suspect in custody, multiple victims. We're going to hold a press conference. They started talking about where broadcast trucks could park. They were handling the logistics of dealing with the media. And they're all doing this on Twitter. Here's what I thought was interesting, and I followed this. This is a screen capture at the time this happened. I caught it on my computer. All updates regarding this incident can be found on the Twitter feed. That's how they communicated the breaking news for the duration of that incident. They also did a Facebook post, okay? But I would submit to you that writing all that out, how long do you think that takes? 20 minutes, 30 minutes? What have I just spent the past 20 minutes now talking about? Speed, right? This is a lot harder to do. Now, this has a place, no doubt about it. Has a place, writing paragraphs, writing media releases, absolutely. It's a tool, just like everything else. Now, let's talk about some of the bad things that happen with social media. There's a term coined by a colleague of mine back east called SMASS, M-A-S-C-A-S-S. Social media career-assisted suicide syndrome. And you guys have probably all seen them and read about them. People say stupid things on social media. And if you're a government official and you do it, you're gonna get nailed for it. If you're a CEO of a company and you put something out publicly and it gets out, you're gonna get nailed for it. It's not always bad, and so I just tell people, yes, it's out there, and you can make mistakes. And unless it's something malicious or extremely offensive and vulgar, the crowd is fairly forgiving. If you repeat it, though, all bets are off. Here's an example. So the Red Cross, this was their tweet on their official, the National International Red Cross page, right there. Ryan found 4 bottle packs of dogfish heads Midas Touch beer. When we do it right, when we drink, we do it right, getting slizzard, right? Well, that's the Red Cross. That's on the official channel. Everybody kind of went, what the heck? So how did they handle it? They handled it with being up front, being fast, and using a little bit of humor. So This was their official response. We've deleted the rogue tweet, but rest assured the Red Cross is sober and we've confiscated the keys. Okay? And then this is the poor gal that did it. Rogue tweet due to my inability to use Hootsuite. I wasn't actually getting slizzard, but excited. Now embarrassed. And then and then what she did is she turned it into a positive by saying, hey, how about giving blood? Thought that was pretty slick. And I've got an hour I could talk about social media fails. So how do you get fast? First, you understand traditional news reporting has changed, and we've already talked about that. People now get their breaking news from the crowd. When I asked how many of you had heard of what I call it, Fire Chat, that's actually a crowdsourced program that was used very effectively in Hong Kong, and it doesn't go through. It's a way for phones to communicate, almost like digital walkie-talkies with text, without going through a network. It's a new program out there used very effectively in Hong Kong because it bypasses, or it just deals with the people, only the people in the general area that can communicate with their phones because of range get the messages. Very sophisticated, and if you're in law enforcement, it can be very scary. You're not going to be faster than the crowd. You got to understand, you can't be fast enough. You just can't. You're never going to be faster than the crowd. Somebody's going to beat you to the punch. It's how you, number one, if you see it, you recognize it, you're looking for stuff, and you can go out and search for it, and then you can respond to it. If you don't engage, you lose valuable opportunities. And the point I want to make here is the time to engage is now. If you wait until something hits your company and all that, if you don't have a digital footprint out there on social media and a group of loyal followers, credible people that you engage with who are kind of on your side, when something bad goes down, you're never going to catch up if you don't have that. You need to have that social media presence ahead of time because you're already behind from the get-go. The other thing that I like to mention here is the old school way of communicating is there's one person in charge and all messages have to go through that person before it goes out to the media. That doesn't work anymore. You can't do it. The message approval process and the old way of doing things does not work in today's age. Arrogance. It's kind of the picture down there on the bottom right-hand side. Hey, you know what? We'll let people, we'll tell people on our time. They can sit in the corner and wait. The news media, no, that's not in play anymore either, because people hold in their hands a device that can be the megaphone and broadcast for you, whether you want it to or not. You don't control the media, you don't control the crowd anymore. And in the past, and I was guilty of it, I was trained this way initially, is we could do that, right? Because everything went through the news media. That's how we got our news out. That doesn't work anymore. Everybody is the news media. So this is the old way. Event occurs, the response, you talk about it, you plan it, you get all the media together in one spot, and you give the information to the media, and then they turn around and give it to the crowd. Doesn't work anymore. This is how it works today. The event happens, the crowd talks about it. The crowd's still talking about it. The people doing the planning in your agency or in your business, they're talking about it too, but they should be monitoring it, helping them develop their messages to get to the public relations officer, or if it's just facts, they can immediately send that information out to the crowd, out to the media, out to the public, without getting it approved, and then deal with the media later. This is a slide that Gerald puts in here, and I really agree with this. Everybody says, well, where do you draw the line about when does message have to go through the CEO or the incident commander? Where does that, how do I know as somebody that's going to release this information if it's okay to do so? And kind of the general rule of thumb is if it's factual, if it's just the facts, yes, we're on scene. Yes, we've had a web server crash, or yes, we've had a fire in our building. We're calling in all of our employees. This is a terrible loss for us. We're working as best we can to, help our employees. Blah blah blah. That's all stuff that you could just go ahead and put out. If it's something talking about, Okay, what are we doing about it? If there's policy, you're going to talk about policies or future plans and things like that. Yeah, that should probably be coordinated with somebody that's got some authority and decision-making authority in the organization and some formal authority. Again, today's instant news dilemmas. One of the big things is, well, you know, we really don't want to put anything out because it may be wrong. And as I mentioned earlier, it's okay to be wrong. People, for the most part, especially with fast-breaking news where a lot's going on, like an active shooter or a fire or some kind of catastrophe in a large-scale regional disaster, the marathon bombing is a perfect example. There's going to be the fog of war. Everybody understands that. But you still need to communicate. You can still say, yep, something's happened, something bad's happened, we're still trying to get our hands around it and figure out what's going on. Please be patient, we'll get you more information as it becomes available. That buys you time. Not a lot of time, but it can buy you time. So don't be paralyzed by not having the facts exactly straight, because you never will at the beginning of an incident. So what does it take? What do you have to do? You have to invest. You have to invest, number one, you have to accept that this is the new reality. You have to invest in learning the tools and learning how these programs work, especially Twitter. It almost has its own culture. It's got its own language. You know, you only have 140 characters to communicate in, but it's extremely important. And this is the tool, Twitter is the tool for crisis communications and incident communications today by news media organizations and the public. That's what they're using. During the Occupy Bellingham event we had, big protest downtown, the city went in to shut everybody down, okay, and shut down the village. They'd set up this little homeless camp they'd set up on the park. We knew it was going to be a big deal. High media event, all the Seattle news stations were up here. We were in a command post monitoring Twitter, the Occupy Bellingham hashtag. And during that event, and they were live streaming, the protesters were live streaming from the street about what the police were doing. And then they shut that channel off after they got booted out. So we were wondering what they were going to do next. We saw it all on Twitter. These people were tweeting what they were going to do next. They were going to storm and march on City Hall. So we used that, called up City Hall, called the chief executive officer and the mayor and said, they're coming your way. So we were able to take some safety precautions with city staff and City Hall to make sure nobody got hurt and we could control them. I'll skip that. Some practical tips. You know, you need to get help. If something happens in your organization and you have a bad event going on, you got to have at least one person that's monitoring the social media channels and trying to figure this stuff out. You're not going to be able to do it yourself. It's not going to be a one-man show. It takes, especially in the initial stages of an event, you got to be smart with hashtags. And if you don't know what a hashtag is on Twitter, it's any word or any phrase with a pound sign in front of it. It makes it easy to catalog and filter and identify common themes in a string of messages. Respect the big two. The big two right now, there's actually four. From a logistics standpoint, the big two are power and internet access, having redundancy there and backup power. The big two on platforms are Facebook and Twitter. Don't discount social media channels thinking it's a fad now and that it's not a legitimate way to communicate in crisis as a business or an organization. They are primary channels that people communicate in their personal lives, and during crisis you tend to do what you do on a normal basis. You fall back on a routine, and that's how people tend to communicate these days. And text messages. Play with it. There's a lot of third-party platforms out there. I'll show you a couple in a minute. People talk about public disclosure, especially in public agencies, extremely important. However, a lot of these tools now have archive functions. Like in Twitter, you can request your archive, and I can go back to my, 40,000 tweets all the way back to 2008 or 2009, and it will send me an Excel spreadsheet with everything I've ever said in social media, which is kind of scary, actually. And then obviously don't speak for somebody else. Speak for your own company, your own agency, and make sure you've got the permissions to speak for them, especially if you're talking about policy impacts. Just a couple of the tools that are out there. And this is a really good one here, and I know the city uses this, right, Marty? At least the police department does. It's called Geophedia. And it's the ability to geographically identify an area and locate any social media post that's happened in a certain time frame in that location. Extremely powerful tool. Ushahidi, social mention. Hootsuite is kind of the standard. Hootsuite, TweetDeck are kind of the standard social media monitoring dashboards out there, which make it extremely user-friendly and allow you to gain and keep situational awareness in crisis. And then First to See, this is something that came out of Seattle, and it's an app that goes on your phone that allows you as a news reporter, if you will, somebody in the public that's seen something or has experienced a crisis, you can use this app to upload what you're seeing and what the problem is on your phone very quickly, and then the public agencies that subscribe to First to See, it will pop up on their dashboard. So they can very quickly geolocate what you've said, so that puts a pin on a map, and then it also, if you took a picture there, or if you wrote down something, you need help or something there, it will geolocate it and put that message in that spot so that responders can go and respond to, or at least find out where the damage is. This is real helpful, especially in earthquake-prone Northwest. So I've blasted through a lot here, and I wanted to leave, I don't know how much time I have. A couple minutes for questions on this stuff. No? No questions? Oh.
I understand everything you said about Facebook and tweeting and stuff, but you didn't mention at all the more conventional, maybe 19th century mechanisms of calling a radio station or issue a press release. Are those just passé now, or?
Yeah, the question was, you didn't mention, the archaic tools like telephone or, calling the media and, basically getting on a phone. In today's, June 10th, 1999, pipeline blew up. I was on the phone with KGMI when the pipeline blew up. My phone got disconnected. I immediately tried, I was the PIO at the time, Public Information Officer at the time. I immediately tried to call them back. I didn't even know it had blown up. I lived just outside of town. I couldn't get through. I got the fast busy signal. Voice communications, digital communication by voice on wireless networks immediately goes down. I don't say immediately, and it's not absolute, but I don't trust it. SMS messaging, for the most part, will stay up, is the experience has been in the public safety realm during crisis, because it uses less bandwidth, I guess. I'm not a techno geek, but I've been told it uses less bandwidth, and frankly, it's faster. People have to answer the phone. You got to rely on somebody being there. You send an SMS message, it'll show up on that person's device and stay there until they look at it. And we saw that with the bridge collapse, Skagit. So really, social media platforms are pretty robust, and people are communicating, using those channels to communicate.
So what I'm hearing too, Bill, is that one of the things we need to do with our own employees, since many people are using their smartphones regularly to tweet about all kinds of things or Facebook posts, is to engage them and educate them about what's appropriate for them to share with the world. And it may be with your customers, your vendors, who knows how they end up sharing with them. But again, we're talking about major education with our own employees, so that in a crisis within our businesses could be something very different from like our callback response times for our support organization
Right.
has gone from its normal 15 minutes to now 4 hours because of something.
Right, that's a good point, Robin. What she was saying is, we need to spend some time educating our employees on, how to appropriately use these tools and all that. And I would take a step back further. And when I do the 4-hour class, we spend a significant amount of time talking about policy. Before this happens within your organization, you have to have the understanding that this is going to happen, that people are going to communicate in crisis, your employees, and you're going to need to give them some guidance ahead of time about what the rules are. So as organizations, you need to sit down and say, okay, this is a reality here. This may happen. Okay, how are we going to deal with that? And there's all kinds of tools out there. The U.S. Army and the U.S. Navy both, actually all the armed forces, but I like the Army's the most, has a very, very good social media guide for their soldiers. And it goes all the way from the soldiers all the way to the generals in the Pentagon about their policies and what their expectations are on the use of social media. And when you think about the military, you think, okay, they're like this, right? Everything's got to get approved. No, they say in their overarching tenets, I think there's like 12 of them, they expect their people to use social media tools and talk about what they're doing. They want them to engage. Within reason, of course. But it's a very, they understand the reality today of how social media is being used by soldiers. And they're saying that's fine, we accept that. But you got to operate within these. You can talk about these things, you can't talk about these things. We want you to represent the Army in the best possible light. We want to engage with the public. And I would encourage all of you to do the same thing. But have a policy, get together and have a policy. Other questions? All right, well, thank you very much for, oh wait, Brian, yeah.
Here are the risk assessment. So like you were talking about cyber risk, what do you prepare for personally or what people?
Oh, okay, so you're talking about emergency management, disaster prep now. What are the biggest risks? Well, obviously the big one's earthquake, right? That's the big one we always prepare for, but I think in preparing for earthquakes, you also are preparing for some of the other things that are more likely to happen, during our lifetime, which is, number one is actually winter storms and floods. Back in 2008, we had a very significant flood here in Bellingham. Usually the floods happen in Whatcom County, right? They're out in the Tules. It don't really affect Bellingham. Well, if you happen to work at Bellingham Cold Storage back in early 2009, you couldn't drive down Squalicum Parkway. The water was 8 foot deep. And there was flooding all over town. So businesses were flooded, basements were flooded, computers were wiped out, traffic was impacted. It was huge. So those are the biggies. And how you prepare is you just, they have the acronym is 3 days, 3 ways, right? Prepare 3 ways to be self-sufficient for 3 days. That's hogwash. In 3 days, you may not even, you may not be able to get your natural gas back on depending on the scope of the incident. You need to be prepared for at least a week is what I do at home. So I've got lots of extra Costco water. I've got all my camping gear still I kept over the years and propane so I can cook, and I've got my water heater strapped down, and I'm also on the board of the Red Cross, and so if you want any more information about disaster preparedness, the Red Cross has great info on their website, and I'd be happy to talk to anybody about that after this. Other questions? All right, well, thank you very much for your time. I appreciate it. It was great.
Thank you. I loved the real-life explanations, and that was exactly what we were hoping for, so thank you so much for that talk. We're a little bit early, but is Shay in here too? Oh, you're back there. Great. So our next group of speakers is a really, really fascinating pair, and I think they're going to be a little bit impromptu in their presentation, and so I'm going to introduce them a little bit differently too. I'll start with Jim. So when I first moved to Bellingham about 4.5 years ago, Jim was on the TAG board of directors, and I was asking Jim to let Western talk at a TAG board meeting. And we had just such a fun and dynamic back and forth about value and rhetoric. And I just really, really loved that conversation. So Jim and I have gone through Leadership Whatcom together.